The early 19th century to the early 20th century was known as the Wild West. It was a time of lawlessness where men took justice into their own hands. The quickest draw with a shot from a gun determined the outcome of many disputes. But the romanticized notion of Wild West duels was far from reality. The deadliest dance was the reality of Wild West duels, a custom that claimed the lives of many and left a lasting legacy in American folklore. Want to know more? In this video, we'll take a closer look at the deadly dance and the reality of Wild West duels. Before moving on to that, we want to welcome you to our channel, Uncovering Mythology and History. Please subscribe now for more exciting videos that'll leave you surprised. Definition of duels. So, what is a duel? A duel is a one-to-one combat or contest between two individuals, typically involving weapons, to settle a dispute or establish superiority. The term duel is often used to describe such combat in historical and fictional contexts, as we have read in books and have seen in the movies. They were a way for people to resolve disputes in a society where the rule of law was often absent. It was a way to maintain order, even if that order was achieved through violence. We know that the Wild West has been romanticized in countless Hollywood movies, but let us tell you that the reality of the time was far different. Gunfights were not the quick and flashy affairs that we often see on the big screen. They were often brutal, bloody, and messy, and duels were no exception. The deadly dance. It is quite interesting that duels are also known as the deadly dance. Do you know why a duel is known as this? So the term deadly dance is commonly used to describe duels in the Wild West. That is because these duels were often fatal, with one or both participants losing their life in the shootout. But why dance? Mainly, the term dance refers to the quick and precise movements of the gunslingers who had to draw their weapons and shoot in a split second, with the outcome being life or death. The term deadly dance highlights the dangerous and deadly nature of these duels, as well as the fast-paced, intense nature of the confrontation. The deadly dance was a dangerous and deadly game, but it was also a way for people to prove their courage and skill. In a society where reputation was everything, a win in a duel was a way to gain respect and show that you were not to be trifled with. Were duels common in the Wild West? Often people ask how duels became a common occurrence in the Wild West. Were duels actually this common? The answer is negative. Duels were not a common occurrence in the Wild West. The myth of the Wild West as a time and place of rampant gun violence and dueling is largely a Hollywood creation. However, there were some isolated incidents of dueling, often between two people with a personal grudge, in some frontier towns. The use of guns in such conflicts was more often the result of a lack of formal legal systems and law enforcement rather than a cultural tradition of dueling. The reality of Wild West duels. People think that the duels were fought for honor or justice, but the real scenario is not that. You'll be surprised to know that duels were often fought not for honor or justice, but out of desperation, fear, or a desire for power. The gunslingers of the Wild West were notorious for their quick tempers and willingness to use their firearms at the slightest provocation. Many duels were the result of drunken brawls, personal grudges, or even simple misunderstandings. There is a popular belief that duels are always fair and equal, but contrary to this popular belief, duels were not always fair and equal. You may ask, how can duels be unfair? So, the individuals participating in the duel were often mismatched, with one person possessing a clear advantage over the other. For example, a seasoned gunfighter might face off against a novice, or a man with a rifle against a man with a pistol. The outcome of these duels was often predetermined, and the loser was at a severe disadvantage. Moreover, the Wild West was a dangerous place, and duels were not the only source of violence. Bandits, rustlers, and outlaws roamed the countryside, preying on the weak and unprotected. Law enforcement was often corrupt or non-existent, and the only way to ensure safety was through the use of a firearm. In many cases, duels were simply an extension of this ongoing violence, rather than a means of resolving disputes peacefully. Do you guys know how a duel usually started in the Wild West? It often began with an insult or a challenge, and it was up to the challenged person to accept or decline the duel. If they accepted, they would choose a weapon and a time and a place for the duel. The most common weapons were pistols, but knives and swords were also used. So, what actually happened on the day of a duel? On the day of a duel, the two men would face each other, with a designated number of steps separating them. The signal to draw was usually a count of 3, and the first man to draw and fire was the victor. It was a quick, deadly, and predictable dance that could only last a few seconds. Basically, that's about it. Rules of duels. Sometimes people are curious if there are any rules or not. What do you think? It's actually astonishing to learn that the deadly dance was a ritual that had strict rules and rituals too. So, what were those rules? The rules for these duels varied widely, but often included the following. Both participants must agree to the duel. Participants must use firearms, usually pistols. The duel must take place at a specified location, often a remote area. Participants must face each other, usually standing back to back and walking a certain number of paces before turning to fire. The first participant to draw and fire is usually considered the winner unless both participants miss or refuse to shoot. Please remember that these rules were informal and often not enforced, and the reality of the Wild West duels was often far more violent and chaotic than portrayed in popular culture. So, we cannot say confidently whether they always maintained these rules or not. Despite the reality of Wild West duels, they have become an enduring part of American folklore. The legendary gunfighters of the Wild West, such as Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James, continue to captivate the imagination of people around the world. Their exploits and daring have been immortalized in countless books, films, and television shows, cementing their place in the annals of history. Decline of duels. However, as time went by, the Wild West began to change. The expansion of railroads and the arrival of law enforcement made the once lawless land a little less wild. Other than that, the decline of dueling in the Wild West can be attributed to several factors including the growth of law enforcement and the increase in legal consequences for violent actions, the improvement of firearms technology, making duels more deadly and reducing the concept's perceived bravery, the changing culture attitudes towards violence as the population became more educated and society became more industrialized. The setting of the frontier and the growth of urban areas led to a decrease in the number of disputes that might have been previously settled by dueling. And lastly, the increasing influence of religious and moral objections to the practice of dueling. Overall, the decline of dueling in the Wild West reflected a larger trend of moving away from frontier justice and towards more formal and regulated systems of law and order. As a result, duels became less common, and those who still engaged in them found themselves on the wrong side of the law. In conclusion, the reality of Wild West duels was far from the romanticized notion of honorable standoffs between gentlemen. Duels were often brutal, unequal, and a result of desperation, fear, or a desire for power. Nevertheless, they have become an indelible part of American history and will continue to captivate people for generations to come. But we need to remember that the reality of the time was far different. Also, the deadly dance was a dangerous and deadly game that claimed the lives of many. Thank you for watching this video on the deadly dance and the reality of Wild West duels. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what other topics you would like us to cover. Until next time, take care and stay safe.